Hi guys, Miss Courtney here. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. So a couple of things should be already done. You should already have had attendance taken, and you guys should have picked up all of your papers as you were coming in. If you have brought any of those papers back for me, like, the ones that your parents had to sign and you had to sign, lab safety contracts, syllabus contracts, all of those things, you could just go ahead and put those in the assignment box based on how it's labeled. So just look for your class period and put your papers in the slot above that. If you have not already gotten your papers from the front, go ahead and pick those up, and I'll give you like a minute to do that, and then we'll go ahead and start with the daily CSI. We're going to start with that sheet that has two pictures of like two little cartoon type pictures on that one page. All right, so like I said, we're going to start with the page that has the two cartoons on it. Um, it looks like. So what you're supposed to do is find the 6 differences between these two pictures, this one and that one. This is the colored version that you should see projected on the screen, and what you have in front of you is the black and white version. If you would like, you can go ahead and grab a highlighter out of that plastic shoebox thing that I have on my desk, and you can use that to circle or highlight what you think is a difference between picture 1 and picture 2. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to grab the highlighters, sit there, look at what you have, and circle the ones that you think are different. All right, so that's plenty of time for you to have figured out what those differences are. So if you would go ahead, make sure your names are on those and turn them into the box and then take your seats. So names on your papers, papers in the box, take your seats. All right, so these are the answers that were the actual differences. So we'll go over them real quick. Let's start over here on this side. So there is an apple here. There is no corresponding apple there. That's one difference. If you look at the tree branches 3 separate times in this picture, and over here it only branches twice. There is a branch missing right there. So that's another difference. On this side there are 2, I think these are just supposed to represent like wood chips because this is a chipmunk. So there are 2 wood chips right here next to that apple. And in this picture, there is only 1 wood chip, so we're missing a chip. That's another difference. Okay, and then over here, our last difference is the length of the root. Right here, the root is a lot longer than it is over here. Here it's shorter. There's actually some circles missing now that I look at this. We should have another circle. Well, we do have that circle actually. Right here. Whoops, that's not my laser. Right here, there's a circle that indicates that the length of the snake's tail is a lot shorter here than it is in this picture. So that's another difference. And then right here, this circle represents that this chipmunk is missing an ear. There should be an ear right here, and you can see that ear in this picture right here. So those are the 6 differences. Hope you got them right. So here's what's going to happen now. I want you to clear your desks of everything. All you need is something to write with, and we're going to go ahead and take that safety quiz that we talked about last class. You're going to take it on the actual paper that's passed out to you. All I'm going to need you to do is either circle or write what letter you're choosing as your correct answer, and you will have 20 minutes to take the quiz. There are 15 questions. You have 20 minutes to take the quiz. I'm going to give the sub a couple of minutes to pass those out, and then I'll set a timer for 20 minutes, and I'll remind you when it's almost time up, and then when I call for the papers, you will make sure your names are on them, and you will turn those into the box as well. So at this point, papers or your quizzes should be passed out. Alright, so if the sub will just go ahead and pause the video, I'll give you about 20 minutes so that you can get your quiz done. And then once all quizzes are turned in, I want you to go ahead and grab your note sheet that's called Scientific Notes, and we're going to start with those. So 20 minutes to do your quiz, turn them in, note sheet over Scientific Notes, or Scientific Method, sorry. One more thing. When the 20 minutes are up and everyone has turned in their work, if you would go ahead and press play again, I'll go over the actual notes that go with your note sheet. Okay, so this topic is going to be over scientific method, which is something that I know you've seen before, but we're going to delve into it and learn how to apply it to forensic science. So here we go. I will try to give you wait time so that you can actually write down the things that show up on the slides. Be aware that the things that are highlighted in blue are the things I really want you to pay attention to and the things that you really need to write down. Everything else is stuff you can write if you would like to. So let's start off by talking about some facts about science. The first thing is that science is a natural phenomenon. It just happens naturally without anyone necessarily advocating or pushing for certain things to take place. Science are considered studies that can be observed, so we can see them, measured, and tested by scientific method. To utilize science, we use our senses to observe and evaluate, and we base those assumptions on how the universe is naturally ordered, where, for the most part, what we see will be reasonable and testable, and we can also use science to predict natural events that may occur. So here's where I'm going to build in some wait time. Science can be based on models, and those models can be physical, mathematical, or conceptual, and we can take it and classify it into a bunch of different fields or topics or categories, all of which are very specialized for study. So very rarely do you find one person who is good at all aspects of science. A lot of these fields overlap, and you will see some similarities, or you'll see similar techniques that we use from physics to chemistry to biology to environmental science, for example, and they all depend on each other so that you can further your knowledge and you can further explanations and theories. Science is a vast body of knowledge. It's constantly changing and expanding, but it does have some limitations. It should be objective and unbiased and also impartial, but because we're humans, there are lots of times when we bring our own bias to certain situations. Again, you should be writing down what's in blue. So in the first two slides, everything that I went over were actual facts about science, things that are true. The next couple of slides, we're going to go over the things that are not true, the things that are myths. There is a firm belief that science is a rigid collection of facts that are inflexible, meaning Once you say that this is a fact, there's nothing that can change that. It can't be altered in any way. That's not true. Science practices and science abilities are changing every single day, and we have to be flexible so that we can keep up with everything that's going on around us. So it's not true that science is inflexible. It is a way to explain the answer to every question. That's not true. A lot of things there's no explanation for. Some things are just not scientifically testable. It's subjective, biased, or partial. It should not be any of these things. If ever a study is subjective, biased, or partial, that's because the person doing the study brought these things into play. Actual chemistry and biology are not any of these things. Again, you're writing down what's in blue. Make sure you're getting down what's in blue. All right, so let's go on to some scientific explanations. The first one is one you're really familiar with, and it's the concept of a hypothesis. As you know, a hypothesis is an educated guess, and it's based on some known information, something that you've already observed or you've seen happening. It has to be based on knowledge or research. You can't just make something up and try to test it. You have to have seen something taking place and have a question about what you've seen. And it has to be testable by scientific methods. You must be able to observe things or measure things or use some kind of scientific practice to get an answer. The other thing is a hypothesis can be proven wrong. It doesn't have to be right, which is one of the reasons that we always say it's an educated guess. A wrong hypothesis just leads you to be able to make an even better hypothesis because you already know how something won't work. So don't ever think of it as you've made a mistake. Just think of it as this is not the right thought or concept for this particular problem. Let me try something else. Okay, so we talked about a hypothesis. Now let's talk about a theory. A theory is pretty much a summarization of a single hypothesis or a group of hypotheses, all of which have been supported with repeated testing over a variety of conditions, done several times. So you had a thought, you've put all your thoughts together, you've tested your thoughts in lots of different ways over and over again, and now you're making a conclusion based on what you've seen, based on what your experiment has told you. If it happens the same way constantly, we consider that a theory. So they're pretty valid as long as no new evidence disrupts them. So theories and facts are not the same thing. They're very well established. You've tested this over and over and over again. They're highly reliable, meaning you've used good practices. Other people have tried your methods. Other people have helped you with your experiments. They can be disproven, modified, or changed with new scientific knowledge, observations, and technology. So they're not there forever. If something different happens, if something new occurs, then your theory could potentially change. Okay, so the next thing is called a scientific law. And a law is a generalized body of observations that can be used to describe or predict something universally understood in nature. So I need you to start thinking of it from the perspective of laws don't explain why something happens. They kind of just state that something does happen and it will happen the same way with no exceptions. So think of when we talk about Newton's laws of gravity, for example, when we talk about why something will drop or behave the way that it does. When we talk about the laws of thermodynamics. They don't explain to us why gravity happens or why thermodynamics exists. It just tells us that this happens and it happens like this all the time. Okay, so what is the scientific method? It's an established method of research and discovery. It follows an 8-step process that allows you to collect and evaluate information, and it's used to solve every case in the criminal justice system. So everything a forensic scientist does is done from the perspective of the scientific method. The method is always going to start with a question. Either you're asking a question or you're defining a question. And that question must be able to be tested. It needs to be specific and it has to be based on things that you've already seen or observed. So once you have a question in mind, the next step is to research the question or the problem. And you can do that using books or journals, manuals, magazines, newspapers, the internet, whatever form of research or whatever source that you have available to you. Those sources need to be scientific, objective, and unbiased. Once you've done your research, you can then start thinking of a hypothesis. And your hypothesis is pretty much what you think is the answer to the question that you've come up with. It's given in the form of an educated guess, and it's what you expect to happen or the answer to your problem. So there are a couple of ways a hypothesis must be written, or there are a couple of things that we have to do in order to have a true hypothesis. It has to be in the form of a statement. The hypothesis cannot be a question. It must be researched before it's stated, so that's why we call it an educated guess. We've looked into it a little bit. We've given it some thought before we've come up with an answer. It must be testable. If we cannot test it, then it's not a valid hypothesis. It can't be used. It must allow for a variable to be tested and results are expected. So if I change this one thing, what is that going to do to all these other things? It should be given in the following format. If this blank is done or changed, then this will happen or be observed. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to write these things down. Okay, so once we have our hypothesis written, the next thing we're going to do is figure out how to collect our data. Data is normally collected in a lab notebook that is kept throughout the entire process, so that way you can always go back and double check yourself. All the details, the data, and the measurements of the experiment are documented, just meaning we write it down, and we write down everything, including if we make mistakes or if we make changes. If we draw tables or graphs or anything of that nature, we clearly label everything so that we can use our information correctly later on. So once we have data collected, now we will analyze it. And we're just going to look at the data closely and try to figure out what it is that we're seeing and what is that data or information telling us. The information can be compared and contrasted. We can use graphs and tables and charts so that we can visually represent the information that we've been given. The next step is then going to be to write the conclusion. So we've taken our data, we've studied it, and now we're going to write out what we mean, what we got from the study, what we understand from the study. So this is where we state whether our results support or disprove our hypothesis. So was our hypothesis correct or was our hypothesis incorrect? This is where we will figure out all the problems or sources of error that we might have encountered. Like, for example, if we used the wrong amount of substance or we didn't have a big enough sample or something like that. This is where our results should be interpreted without any bias or prejudice. When you're a scientist, it's not about was I completely correct or was I even correct. It's about did my experiment work the way that it should, especially as a forensic scientist. You can't have an ego, so it can't be, oh yeah, this blood work really does prove that John Smith was the one that killed Jane Doe. It has to be actually accurate. It can't be about your reputation, in other words. Now, once we've written our conclusion, the next step is to communicate our results. And the way scientists do that is we try to publish those results in a written format. And that's normally done in a scientific journal. It's just a special magazine, if you want to think of it that way, just for research. It's just where we share what we've learned. We can also share our results through lecturing and retesting. Okay, so this is just a graphic that shows you all the general steps of the scientific method. Excuse me. We always start off by asking a question. From our question, we then do research. From our research, we come up with a hypothesis, what we think is the answer to our question. Then we test it with an experiment. Once we've tested it, we're going to analyze it, look at the data, and figure out does it support this hypothesis or not. And then we have to make a choice. If the results support our hypothesis, then we can report our results when we're done. But if our results do not support our hypothesis or only sort of support our hypothesis, we still report that, but then we go back to make a new hypothesis, and we do all these steps again. So this is a continuous thing. We're always cycling it. We're always thinking through it. Even when we get good results, we're always trying to find a way to make what we've done better. So along with scientific method, you also need to know about experimental design. So experimental design is just how we should design an experiment so that we can test a question or a hypothesis. The experiment should be based on the research that was done when we came up with the question and when we came up with the hypothesis. Then data collection should be done. We should do it really carefully and answer the following questions. And feel free to write some of these questions down. Things like, how should we collect our data? How can we measure our data? Is it going to be quantitative, where we're looking at numbers? Is it going to be qualitative or objective, where we're looking at something else that can't be counted? The method for recording data collection should also be pre-mediated. So how are we going to actually collect our data? Are we going to use a chart or a graph? Are we going to be counting individual things? Are we going to run our experiment over and over several times? That's all. That stuff is where this is where you plan all of those things. So think of your experimental design as you planning out how to conduct your experiment. Okay, then the next step in this would be our variables. Your variable is anything that can be changed or controlled in an experiment. And those changes occur because something else changed. So in other words, this is what you have control over, what you move or manipulate or change or affect. There are three kinds of variables. The first kind is called the independent variable. This is the factor that changes, or the one that's different between two groups. And when you work with an independent variable, it's best to just use one thing or to just change one thing. So that way you know that you're seeing what you're seeing because of what you're doing. If you change many things, then who knows why you're getting the results you're getting. Now, when we analyze criminal cases, sometimes it's not possible to control just one variable. A lot of times in forensics, we're working with multiple variables. Okay, so the next kind of variable is called the dependent variable, and this is the one that's observed to see whether it's affected by the independent variable. So the dependent variable is your result that you're going to see. It's normally the data that's collected as the experiment progresses, and it's going to depend on what has been changed in the experiment. We also have other variables that we call control variables or constants. And these are things that we could change, but we choose not to. By choosing not to change these things, we're making sure that the results we see is because of the one thing that we are constantly changing. All right, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to write this down. So why is science important in forensics? Well, the criminal justice system is based in science. The field of forensics is based in science. And the entire system has been tremendously impacted and affected by the use of the scientific method and scientific knowledge. It is the scientific method that allows us to prove cases. It's the systematic way of thinking about the information that we have and coming up with a thought or coming up with a hypothesis that we can then test that tells us if someone or something committed a crime. Or something that led to a crime, I should say. Things don't commit crimes, but you get what I'm saying. All right, so these are the sources that I used to make this PowerPoint, and hopefully now you're done with your notes. So a couple of quick things. Somehow when I made your note sheets, I got like a crossword puzzle and another like worksheet thing that I want you to do attached to that. So if you would rip that very back page out, the notes are yours to keep. That back page is what I now would like you to work on, and you should be able to get that turned in before you leave. If there is still time, there is something that you should have picked up called, sorry, I'm looking at my copy of it, called the MSDS Activity Worksheet. This is going to be your homework for tonight. If there's time in class, it's 10 questions. Feel free to finish it and turn it in. If not, then this is homework. Okay? So hopefully this wasn't too hard to follow, and I will see you guys when I get back next week. Have a great weekend and enjoy your Labor Day holiday on Monday. Don't do anything silly. See you soon. Bye.